Hey, you lovely lot, it is Miss Samuels speaking to you over the airwaves or YouTube or whatever. I'm hoping that you're okay and that you're keeping safe and that you're all feeling really well. This is the start of my video lessons to you because I want to make sure that you guys are up to date. I also don't want you to just have to constantly read things and then write things down. I want to be able to give you a bit of the Samuels magic, which isn't that magical, to help you get to where you want to be. So today's lesson, we're going to recap over risk assessments and look at risky business. This is the last bit to help you with your advertising projects for Unit 20. The next lesson you get from me will be starting our Unit 16, which looks at sound. So, as a little bit of homework, please can you set up a page on your Weebly blog for Unit 16, okay? There's going to be 4 LOs on that, LO 1, 2, 3, 4. So Unit 16 is the blog you need to create. Okay, right. This lesson here is all about risky business. Okay, so we're going to identify the risks that you would use in any media production. Now, this lesson will help you for your Unit 20, but it'll also help you for any coursework that you're doing because it will allow you to think about the risk assessment process. It also is going to help you for your Unit 2 exam, which will be in January. All right, let's get started. So, here's 2 media productions happening. What do you think the risks might be just from looking at those pictures? My question really is though, why do we need a risk assessment? What really could be at risk? Someone on a zip wire, who could be at risk? What could be at risk? Any equipment that could be at risk? Think about realistically why you think as a media producer you need to create a risk assessment. Well, the real answer is to protect you as a media producer, to protect people's lives and to protect equipment. So, for example, you don't want to end up with a broken foot. Should have done that risk assessment in the gym, shouldn't I? You don't want to end up feeling unwell or getting COVID, coronavirus, or even spreading it. You don't want to have expensive equipment that you are now going to be charged for. You don't want to end up in prison. And you definitely don't want to end up hurting anyone or risking lives. So it's really important as a legal document when you're a media producer to make sure you've done a risk assessment. Okay? So, when you're looking at any production that's visual based, so that is anything from advertising, print products, to making a film, to making an audio visual, you need to consider these things. Okay? So you need to have a risk assessment, which is what we're going to look at in detail, a recce, and you need permission slips from both the people taking part in your production and also for any locations that you use. So if you wanted to use my TV studio, you'd need my permission to do that. If you're doing something like a podcast or an audio piece, you would just need a risk assessment and a permission slip. The recce, this is like an army recce, but the recce is there to help you decide how you're going to film something or shoot something and what might be the potential areas of concern. So, for example, you might take a photo for your recce, then in your chart talk about what could be potential issues, and then you could talk about what you're going to do to control those issues and how you're going to film on the day. So, what I'd like you to do with the following things is to make some notes. If you need to, pause the video, go grab a paper and pen or your book and make some notes on the hierarchy of controls, okay? So thinking about how we make sure there's enough controls in place. And you're going to make notes on the following, okay? So there are 5 things we need to consider when we are creating a media production and thinking about the risks involved. Okay, let's think about if we were to create an action adventure scene with bombs going off, people jumping from planes, a massive chase scene. Okay, we can imagine there's a lot of risks involved. And as a media producer, you need to consider whether you can eliminate any problems, you can substitute any of the issues, you can isolate what's going on to help you make sure you get the best results, you can redesign what you're doing, and finally, you can protect yourself. We've got that word that comes in here that we've been seeing a lot in the news recently, PPE. So let's explain this a bit more carefully. Okay. So the first thing you do is you think about eliminate. Is this something that I really need in my film? Could it be gotten rid of really easy? So look at the project you're doing. If it is an action adventure film or it is an advert on a tube station, I want you to think about, does it really need to be done in this way? Or actually, could I do it without this? Could I put a control in place by completely getting rid of that idea and decided on something different? So, for example, you might have decided that you wanted a massive explosion, but actually you probably could have done that with being a bit more clever with your camera tricks or doing it in post-production. So you wouldn't have an actual explosion, you'd just get rid of that bit of the scene. Perhaps it is a short film about knife crime. Do you actually need to have someone being stabbed? Could you get rid of it from the scene because actually it's more about what's being implied or the intent of it? Okay, so these are all about what can you put in place before we even start the product to get on your risk assessment so you can make sure that you are controlled and ready to go. Could you replace any of it? So substitutions. Could it be that rather than using an actual cigarette, you could just have a packet of cigarettes and have reference to it? Rather than actually having, water in the scene you're using, perhaps you could just have the sound effects of water. Replacing the material or the process means that it's less hazardous and there's not so many issues. Okay, so it's making sure that you might have thought of a better or a safer alternative. Okay, so the first one, get rid of. So for example, if there's wires in the way or you're using a knife, do you really need it? Could you get them out of the way? The second one is to replace. So rather than using a certain object, maybe replacing it with a different one. If you're using an actual knife in it, maybe you could replace it with a rubber one. I don't know. Next one is prevent access, so isolate it. So this might be when you are doing your recce, you notice that there is a hole in the ground or a bit of a pothole. Could it be that you actually make it clear that this is a hazard and isolate it so that no one falls? Perhaps it is a bit of uneven ground. Could you maybe put a bit of a wooden plank in the way? Or maybe there's wires that people could trip over. Could you make it really clear that they're there or have another way or route for them to get to? Perhaps with tape or perhaps with signage to help people see that it's a bit of a hazard where it's at. Okay, next one, redesign and organise. So it might be thinking about how you could change what you're doing slightly. Maybe thinking about telling people that they can't use their mobile phone in that area because otherwise if they're using their mobile phone in that area it might cause issues with the machinery or it could be a distraction tool and they could trip. Perhaps you might want to show people a procedure of how they leave or enter the studio. Perhaps you want to tell everyone the fire regulations and where their access points are, but you organise something so that it is really key. Another way of organising things and redesigning it is thinking about who's needed on set at that same time. Too many people on set could be a risk. So you could create a call sheet to make sure there's only 3 bodies in the studio at one time to stop there being any causes of harm. Last one, PPE. So protecting yourself. Making sure that if a helmet is needed, that's what you're wearing. If you're dealing with chemicals, you are wearing plastic gloves. If you're dealing with a situation where you could be exposed to something like COVID, are you able to have access to washing hands and to make sure that maybe face masks are worn? Perhaps if you are dealing with open flames, that you're thinking about the equipment you're using there and goggles. Perhaps if you are going down a mountain, you're thinking about the right equipment that you're using with that. So PPE should only be selected if people know how to use it and that all other risk controls have been considered as well. So let's look at how we make those risk assessments for your production. This is how we evaluate the different risks. Okay? So the first thing you would look at is you'd think about, right, one of the biggest risks is our TV studio, there are wires everywhere and they're a trip hazard. And you'd look at this column first, the likelihood. How likely is it that you would trip? Is it almost certain? Is it likely? Is it maybe a little bit likely, but moderately all right? Is it very unlikely, or is it rare? For me, I think it's likely. Okay, because I think when we're doing work and stuff like that, we can be easily distracted and not notice. So likely is where I'd put it. Now, if you tripped in that TV studio and you were holding a DSLR camera, that could be thrown in the air and it could hit someone and hurt them. It could hit you and hurt you. Those cameras cost between £500 and £1,000. It could also damage the equipment quite significantly. For me, I think that's a major issue. Someone could get hurt and also someone could actually break something that's quite expensive. That is quite a major incident. So what you do is you follow the likely route and the major route, and that would mean that it's an extreme risk. Okay? Water in the radio studio. How likely is it that that water would get onto the technology and cause either a fire or cause the technology to break? It's probably moderate, but what the impact might be, a fire which could cause death and computers that could break automatically, is either major or catastrophic. So again, we're hitting the extreme part. Perhaps we might have someone's shoelaces undone. Okay, it could be unlikely. If your shoelace is undone, you could trip over, you could hurt yourself, you could break other stuff. So again, I'd say it's quite a major incident, but because it's unlikely, it's only a high risk, not an extreme risk. It could be that you have someone that coughs in the studio and then that spreads COVID. Now, it might be unlikely or moderate that we place that, but we know that that could have quite moderate or major reactions. So we're hitting it around this area, high, again, or even extreme. Okay? So you need to think about what could be the risk and would it be classed as high, moderate, low, or extreme, based on looking at the likelihood first and then the consequences. Now in radio, it's a really simple risk assessment. You would talk about what you are doing and what you need to do in terms of your activity. You'd put your name on there and you'd think about what different things could be affected. And then you'd list the hazards and what you're going to do to help them out. So those controls come in. Maybe it's eliminating something or maybe it's using PPE with what you've got. And then you would circle whether you think it's a high, low or medium risk level for all of the work that you're completing. This is quite basic and it's one of the things that they use in BBC Radio. In BBC TV, it's even more simplified. You tick a box, you then highlight which one you think is going to be, whether it's negligible or severe, and work out the risk that way, and you just sign through the form. The issues that the BBC have found with these risk assessments, though, are that they're too basic. there's not enough detail. There's not enough considerations of how to control each element. And it would mean that they had to do more work in the future by doing a more thorough risk assessment. So again, more potential risks. For that reason, when I ask you guys to do a risk assessment, I don't want it to look like this. I want it to be far more detailed so that you get a better reaction in the future, a better product in the future, and a lot less issues and risks. So a good way of doing it is looking at what the hazards are, who might be harmed and how, what you're doing already or your controls that you've got in place, anything else you need to do to control the risk, who needs to action this, when do they need to action it, and what is the hazard rating. Now, it doesn't have to be in that order. You might decide that actually the hazard rating needs to go at the start or in the middle. You can choose that, but you need to make sure all of these areas are covered for it to be enough detail. So, this is the first task I'd like you to do. You probably need about 6 minutes to read through this brief and make notes. And then I'd like you to spend about 15 to 20 minutes making a risk assessment. So to do this, you could just use Google Docs or Word, create a table, and that table can be whatever you want it to look like, as long as all of those things are covered. Okay, so here is your brief. All right, consider what could be at risk and think of all that is needed on your set. Your client has asked you to film a how to stay healthy in COVID lockdown, and it's a short film. Amy Smile is your presenter, and she will have 3 members of the public joining her. That includes 2 adults and 1 12-year-old child. There will be filming in a kitchen and in the adults' garden. You need to make sure filming and sound recording is professional, is done in a safe way, and is very entertaining. I want you to create that risk assessment, but also think about how you can protect your recording, especially the sound recording, and what other risks you might want to consider for your production. So, read through this task, create your own doc. Please share it with me, and I want you to create your first risk assessment. You can pause the video now to do that. Great, thank you for doing that. Make sure that you send it to me, lsamuels@netherhallschool.org. I'd love to look through those, and then I'll give you some feedback if necessary to help you improve for the future. Right, so in summary, risk assessment process should be really simple, but it will protect you in the long run to making a really fantastic production. So when you're making a risk assessment, you need to identify everything that could go wrong, who might be affected or what might be affected, and how it could be harmed. So equipment, people, you, what is the thing that's going to be harmed and how. Identify what kind of control is needed. So is it a PPE system? Is it something that you need to replace or substitute? Is it something you need to eliminate completely? And what is needed to help it stop going wrong? I want you to think about what other risks could be there once you put those reasonable controls in place, and also where they are in terms of risks. Are they high, low, medium, moderate? I want you to record all of the findings that you do and make sure that you keep it so that everyone can know what they're doing for their production, and make sure all of it gets done. If there are anything that changes in the future, you'd have to do a new risk assessment, or on your blog say, I've now considered, because I've changed these things, that these are risks I need to think about. Okay. Now, in terms of a production, you're always able to get help. I'm there to help you out. There'll be other members of the team to help you, but also you can use your own intuition. All right. So that's a summary of your risks. What I'd like you to do now, bearing in mind what you've just learned, is make sure on your blog you have done a risk assessment that is thorough enough for your print advert and for your audiovisual advert. I want you to think about what might affect you, what might affect others, and what might affect equipment. This needs to go with all your planning documents in your LO2. So this isn't part of your pitch. This is part of the other P task, okay, which is all about your planning documents. You need to get a risk assessment in there. If you want to double it up, you could do a recce, but you might want to wait for that recce for when we get back to school. So that's risk assessments in a nutshell. You've got 2 tasks to work on there, and then our next lessons together is going to be looking at sound. See you later.